Will there be a nuclear war in Russia, in Ukraine, from Russia over that war that they're having right now? That's it's hard. I'm stumbling over my words even saying that, because it's hard for me to even believe I'm saying it out loud. And this is no longer some kind of weird hypothetical situation. The events are propelling us closer and closer to where this could be a very, very realistic scenario. And this is something that every policymaker in America better get their crap together quickly, and recognizing that I don't give a crap about spin. I don't care what you want to happen. I don't care what the rules you think have been in effect up to this point. It is time for cold, hard facts to start mattering, because we are moving down a road right now that has an end that we will not like, and that could be literally catastrophic for mankind at a worst case scenario. At a semi best case scenario, if it gets to there, it will be having a devastating consequence, which could destroy our ability to be the world's leader that we have been for the last century. We could undo everything that we have gained since World War II if we keep going down a foolish road. Now, again, this may sound like hyperbole, and it may seem like over the top. I guarantee you, I am telling you as firmly as I can, what I'm telling you here is a very sober, rational, logical, and realistic possibility. And it is time for us to wake up, both as individuals and as our country. So let's just backtrack just a little bit, back to last month, because some things have been happening earlier today, and actually in the last few days, which should raise the alarm bells that how serious this is here. So back on February 20th, the President Biden published what was basically a commercial trying to compel his political opponents here in Washington to pass a legislation that he had gotten his Senate to pass, to where they would send a bunch of money to Ukraine and several other places here. And to try and shame everybody in the Republican Party into submission, he published this article.
We have to stand up to Putin and pass the national bipartisan bill, the National Security Bill, supporting Ukraine as they defend themselves against Putin's vicious onslaught, and prove to the world once more America can't be relied on. We stand strong with our allies. We have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America. We keep our commitments. We never walk away from our friends. And we sure as hell don't bow down to Vladimir Putin.
So everything he's asking for there is to continue this 2-year war that's been going on against Russia, we've provided everything you can imagine in our inventories. So you're talking Patriot air defense systems, long-range missiles, HIMARS systems, M1 Abrams tanks, Stryker vehicles. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Not to even minimize the things about training that we've done for the Ukraine side, intelligence, targeting support, help for them to the Ukraine side to attack the Black Sea Navy fleets, all kinds of stuff. Putin is starting to get tired of it, or he was back then, and he let it know. So just days after Biden published that little TV commercial, Putin went on and made one of his own.
They're talking about the possibility of sending NATO military contingents to Ukraine. But we remember the fate of those who once sent their contingents to our country. But now, the consequences for possible interventionists will be much more tragic. We also have weapons. They know about this. As I just said, we also have a weapon that can hit targets on their territory. And they should understand that what they're doing now, trying to scare the whole world, it does risk a conflict with nuclear weapons, which means the destruction of civilization.
Now, so many people, especially these war firsters in the United States, always want to say, he's just threatening that. He's never going to do that. Ben Hodges is one of the worst violators of this, constantly saying we should not self-deter ourselves out of risk that he could use nuclear weapons one day. We should just keep going because he'll be deterred from our nuclear weapons. Meaning somehow these people think that we can keep doing literally anything we want to, and there's never going to be any kind of consequence. Well, as a new book that just recently came out tells us, we were actually close to a nuclear use earlier in this war over something of relatively small tactical significance for the Russian side. which they eventually, obviously they didn't use it, or you would have heard about that, self-evidently. But let me set the stage for what you're about to see here, because there's an expert, Jim Sciutto, who went on CNN to explain what happened, or what almost happened, in the fall of 2022. So there was a, a place called Kherson City that the Russians eventually withdrew from, and abandoned the city. They had occupied it, and the pressure that was coming from the Ukraine military led one of the generals, the Sorovikin, to conclude that it would be better for them to withdraw from that, set up new lines of defense. They blew the bridges across the Dnieper River, and they sealed off that threat. As we now find out, there were other things that were on Putin's plate to consider at the time. He could have chosen a different path, and if he had felt more compulsion and couldn't withdraw in order, he may have taken action that was very much something out of a horror movie.
There was one more piece to this, and this made it even far more serious, is that the U.S. received intelligence, communications among Russian military officers discussing that very possibility of a use of nuclear weapons. And this then led U.S. officials to go on really an international full-court press to prevent this from happening, direct contact with Russian officials, getting allies on board as well, but interestingly, enlisting the help of India and China. It has always been the case that the use of particularly a tactical nuclear weapon, battlefield nuclear weapon, of course, it's not going to destroy a city, but still devastating on the battlefield, is that it's lower on their escalation ladder than it is on the U.S. escalation ladder, and could be in response to a conventional threat, including the loss of Russian territory. And of course, this is Ukrainian territory, but Russia had claimed it was their own.
Now, that last part there is going to be crucial, because what some are calling Ukrainian territory, many in Russia, Vladimir Putin, among the least greatest of them, considers some of that territory Russian territory, not just Crimea, but in these 4 territories that they have now annexed illegally. But it doesn't matter whether we think it's legal or not. If Vladimir Putin, in his mind, that is Russian territory now, then when he says the things, the actions he's going to take, if Americans or anybody from NATO gets onto Russian territory, you better take that seriously, because he very much means what he says. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of clips from some things that Putin said earlier today that ramps this up yet another higher level. But let me give you the stage setter for what prompted some of these comments. You may have seen many times, many comments here in the last 10 days or so, where first the German chancellor admitted publicly that French and UK soldiers had been on the ground in Ukraine, helping the Ukraine side operate missiles that killed Russians, that attacked the Russians. So they're NATO troops on the ground that are helping participate in the war against Russia. And then UK apparently leaked some information that also German officials had been there. Now you have the Polish foreign minister saying, hey, maybe we should think about sending some more troops into Ukraine, maybe into the western part of Ukraine. I mean, who cares about what are these red lines? I mean, we're not going to self-deter ourselves, similar to what Hodges had said here. You have Emmanuel Macron, the leader of France, keeps saying, hey, we should not just set our own red lines and deter ourselves. We should put everything on the table there. So more and more people are talking about, yes, let's go into Ukraine on the side of the Ukraine against Russia. So that message is being heard in Moscow. So today, I think, to try to send another warning, Putin went out and first of all said this in terms of any Americans that may be on the ground in Ukraine.
The United States announced that they were not going to send troops. We know what American troops are on the Russian territory. These are invaders. This is how we will treat it, even if they appear on the territory of Ukraine, and they understand this.
Now then, the next thing he's talking about is these red lines that people keep talking about. And before I show you the next clip, let's talk a little about the red lines and what is prompting him to say this now, and why we should pay more attention to this than ever before. Now, when this war started, at first we were just talking about defensive weapons. Actually, just before it started, we said we would send Ukraine defensive weapons, not offensive ones. Once the war started, then we started sending them a lot more, like anti-tank guided missiles, Stinger missiles, anti-aircraft type missiles. and a handful of other things. Then we started going, okay, but we're not going to send any HIMARS. We're not going to send any tanks, not going to send any aircraft, because that would be a red line and it could potentially spawn a response from Russia. And then we like tipped our toe in that and said, well, how about just a few offensive weapons? And that didn't do anything. And here's some HIMARS. Here's some 155 millimeter howitzers, the M777s. That didn't spawn anything. So now how about some Marder vehicles out of Germany, some self-propelled personnel carriers? And then, well, how about some Stryker vehicles? How about some Bradleys? How about some tanks? So we keep pushing further and further. That didn't do anything. Well, let's go further. So that, things we used to think were red lines, and then it was long-range missiles. Britain started bringing those in with the Storm Shadow. So that didn't cause anything either. And then it's like, okay, well, it can't go into Russia. Well, then Ukraine side starts attacking into Belgorod and several other border cities. So that didn't cause any response. So now then it's like, maybe there's no red line at all. Now they're saying, sure, why not the F-16s? Any month now, those could be coming on. Apparently by July, those are supposed to be making their combat debut. Every step we keep taking tells Putin that there's no red line. Whatever you may say or whatever we may self-think, every time we push up on these lines, there's no retaliation. Russia doesn't expand the war. Now we're starting to think that there is none. So that's why you see these more Western leaders being more cocky and confident about talking about troops going in there, because there's long been some concern and some consideration that Western troops could go in, well, just to the western part of Ukraine to solidify that or protect it or some such nonsense, any kind of an excuse to get troops in. Thus far, they have wisely not done so. But you see now the many Western leaders keep talking more and more boldly about troops on the ground. And it seems clear that we're trying to lay the groundwork for actually moving in some non-combatant military personnel from NATO into Ukraine. And now then Putin is saying, okay, you think there's no red lines? Well, guess what, my friend? Neither do I, as he said today.
Well, first of all, North Korea, they have a nuclear umbrella of their own. They have not asked us for anything. Secondly, from what we see now, from what's happening on the battlefield, we are doing quite fine with the goals that we have set out for ourselves. As for those states who are saying that they have no red lines in regards of Russia, well, they need to understand that Russia will have no red lines in regards of these countries.
Now, so far, we keep hearing him say stuff like that. He said things similar to that in throughout this 2 years of war, and we've just said, well, he didn't mean them, implying that we're starting to think, and he never will. Like there literally are no red lines. There's nowhere we can go, nothing we can do that's not going to cause Putin to actually strike back in some way that we don't want to. We had Doug McGregor on our show recently where we were talking about some of these very issues. And I was really frustrated because it seems like that we're doing so many foolish things on the battlefield that could lead to an escalation. This was even before he had made these current comments about red line. And listen to what Doug has to say. If the Russians see the Western nations doing this, putting all this money in killing their troops, I mean, at some point they're going to say it's stupid for us not to get ready for that outcome. And of course, then you have this mutually building fear of each other. And that's what leads to a lot of wars. And so we're going down a path right now that our foolish actions here could lead us into catastrophe.
No, I think so, but I also think Mr. Putin is a rational man. He's never wanted any of this. He really wants to get back to some sort of state of normalcy with the West and do business. But as you say, he has to respond to what he sees develop. Right now, we have Americans moving in to create bases in northern Finland and Sweden. We've destroyed decades of trust and mutual confidence, replaced all of it with mutual suspicion, fear, and distrust.
So all this mistrust and the anger that you're starting to hear grow on the Russian side, and the confidence you're starting to see on the Russian side too, because elsewhere in that long hour and a half interview that he did today, from which we drew those comments, he was talking about how things are going well on the battlefield. They have things under control. They see many of the same things I keep telling you. They are aware much more than I about their industrial capacity, about their growing military power, about their growing experience on their about their drone capacity, their ability to make these longer range missiles, many of which, as he pointed out specifically, on these long range glide vehicles with ICBMs that can't be interdicted by American national defense. In case anybody was wondering, he sort of threw that nugget out there as well. But he said one thing here that I think that shows his kind of state of mind and how he's viewing with contempt what Doug was talking about there at the end, about how we've destroyed a lot of trust. Now it's moving from the lack of trust into contempt. And when you lose the ability to view your opponent in rational terms, and it starts to get irrational emotions, bad things start to happen. Here's the way he said it, and listen to his language, especially at the end of the clip.
In the Western elites, there is a strong desire to freeze the current unfair state of things in international affairs. For centuries, they've been stuffing their stomachs with human flesh and they've been stuffing their pockets with money, but they must realize that this ball of vampires is about to end.
This ball of vampires is about to end. I guess that's some sort of Russian phrase. I don't know, but you can see the anger that's building up as he's saying this, and the contempt, maybe even more than anger, contempt for the West. And listen, let me tell you that Jim Sciutto made a comment about it there, but I can tell you from my own study, the threshold for using nuclear weapons on the Russian side is much lower than it is on our side, because he makes a distinction, a differentiation between a tactical nuclear weapon and a theater nuclear weapon of the kind that can melt entire cities in the West through ICBMs. But I'm telling you, psychologically, and the way the world is, the minute any nuclear weapon is used, the way that everybody thinks about any kind of national security war is instantaneously destroyed. It's all gone. Everything that we thought we knew about deterrence and everything else is over, and fear will grip people all over the world. And when people are terrified and afraid, they make really bad decisions. And when people have contempt for their opponents, they also can make really bad decisions. And if Putin ever comes to the point to where we do cross what probably genuinely is his red line, which is NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine and fighting in areas where he considers, their direct conflict, the chances is very high that he may use a tactical nuclear weapon. That's how serious this is here. Look, we've had previous shows here where we talked about how Putin has been saying things since 2007 about Ukraine in joining NATO, and about the consequences of that and what he would do for it. He was very clear, has always been very clear about what he would do, and he finally acted on it. So he gave warnings. We crossed that red line. He took action. And he has been saying over and over all the time through, even from before the war started all the way through, he's still willing to have a negotiated settlement. But the longer things go on and the more his forces continue to move to the West, the less inclined he's going to be to have a negotiated settlement, and may push for a surrender terms from the Ukraine side. He may say, I'm just going to push this all the way through until we get military victory so that I can issue terms of surrender, not have to negotiate things that I don't want, and freeze the conflict, as he used the phrase in there. Many in the West would be desires to have that. Now, I've been outspoken from the outset of this that that's what we should do to get this off the table and to start to tamping down the threats and the risk of nuclear weapons, so that we can get back to normalcy, to where then there is stability on both sides of that line and the world can get back to something close to a peaceful condition. The longer we go in here with these nonsensical ideas that we're going to help Ukraine win, it's just hard for me to fathom why we would do that. What is the gain that we think we can have? If anyone thinks that there is a path by which Russia could lose and we not go to war, has lost their mind. I'm just going to point blank say it. I don't care if that insults anyone. That's the truth. There is no path that Russia could somehow be induced to lose strategically and somehow not use their nuclear weapons. If there was any doubt in your mind, Putin's telling you right there, he will use it. It's in their security. Jim Sciutto told you we were this close earlier in the war. So if that was just over the city of Kherson, and the tactical loss that would entail, and we had to go aggressively to China, to directly to Russia, to try and tamp that down, what do you think is going to happen if it's something serious like NATO troops entering into the country, especially now that Putin feels like he's on the pro side and winning on the conventional level? Do you see how irrational it is what we're doing? Ukraine's not going to win this war. But if you wanted to do something like introduce Western troops into this to try to change the conventional dynamic on the ground in Ukraine, then we are cutting our own throats. We are basically moving towards self-destruction. There is no possible answer to win if a nuclear device is used. If Putin uses one on the ground in Ukraine, then we will be faced with a decision that is hard to imagine how we don't fumble and drop. And that is, if he uses a nuclear weapon on the ground in Ukraine, do we then retaliate by a nuclear weapon on Russian territory, knowing that the chances of him then retaliating on NATO territory, or specifically on American territory, would be almost a certainty? Or do you not respond with a nuclear weapon and allow him to have used one there? And of course, everyone knows that that will make us look incredibly weak. Do you see the conundrum that would exist at that point? It's like either you are being seen as being cowed down, or you escalate to the point to where you sacrifice millions of your own people on a foolish nuclear exchange that should never have happened. That's the territory that we've got our toe right on the edge of right now. I cannot tell you how foolish what we're doing is, but that is where we are right now. That is a fact. And all of these things that we're showing you and we keep telling you and keeping you informed of every day, the threat is growing higher and higher. What the United States should do right now, today, is acknowledge truth, acknowledge what's going on the ground, acknowledge how all these things are happening, acknowledge the risk that everybody faces if this thing goes much further. If we actually punch over a red line that Putin may now be willing to hold and to hold us accountable to, we need to seek a negotiated settlement. We need to tell Ukraine, we've gone as far as we can. We gave you every chance in the world last year to prove the critics wrong, that you could actually push Russia out. It didn't happen. It's never going to happen. So we're going to stop pretending otherwise. We'll give you enough money to hold the line as best you can, as long as you aggressively and publicly seek a negotiated settlement. And as Putin is saying, then their terms are still going to be bad. And as I keep saying, the longer Ukraine waits to start that day, the worse the terms are going to be. But as bad as they are now, it's nothing compared to the loss that could happen if Russia continues on and either conventionally captures even more cities and more territories, or if it ends up, crossing that nuclear escalation line. Everything gets worse from there, and there's no going back from it, folks. There is no going back from it then. If we seal this off right now and do what I recommend and seek a negotiated settlement, it'll be embarrassing for us. It'll be humiliating, and that'll resist for a while. That'll have residual effects. But then things will settle back down. Things will get back to normal. And we'll have to, make more of an outreach back to Russia to at least have engagement with them to keep things on a relatively stable plane. We did it throughout the entire Cold War when mutual assured nuclear destruction was a constant feature. We can definitely do it again as long as that keeps the nuclear threshold down low. That's what we need to do. If we don't, there is no guarantee that this does not end in a nuclear cloud somewhere over Western Ukraine. That's the truth of it. Let's make sure we don't get to that point. There is off ramps. There are plenty of paths we can take not to get up to that. It's time that we do. Well, thank you very much for being with us today. We remain unintimidated and uncompromised, and we will continue to bring you great information like this and keep you appraised of all of the advancements that keep happening on both sides of this line here. And we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.